Hi, my name is Jason Webb, and I'm a first year medical student at the OSU College of Osteopathic Medicine at the Cherokee Nation campus in Tahlequah. I'll be presenting to you today about COVID-19 and its effect on pediatric orthopedic clinical trials. Our research team wanted to dig into the impact of COVID-19 on clinical trials, and especially those in the field of pediatric orthopedics. Clinical trials are crucial for the progress of practical clinical medicine that can be used to help patients in the near future. COVID-19 has impacted many things in the medical field, but has also trickled down to clinical research. Updated FDA guidelines have been adopted by researchers to prioritize patient safety. Our goal is to be able to find a quantifiable number of how the pandemic impacted clinical trials. We performed our study by using the clinicaltrials.gov database, a public database that gives information about clinical trials that not only happen in the United States but also across the world. We screened multiple studies, making sure that they fit our defined period of COVID-19, which we established was January 1st of 2020, all the way up until we pulled our search string, which was in October 31st of 2021. We ensured that the clinical trials were relevant to pediatric orthopedics and also took note of where they were located in, what was their funding source, the reason for why it was discontinued, and how many participants were available. Also, when we found that a study was withdrawn, suspended, or terminated, we also went more into depth to see why exactly it was terminated. Our search string returned us with 544 trials, of which we included 128. Of those 128, we had about 15,194 participants included. Out of the 128, we found 9 of them were discontinued, about 7%, but that included almost 500 participants. So it doesn't seem like a significant amount, but we're talking about 500 patients that were infected due to discontinuation. Of those 900 clinical trials, we found a third were impacted or stated mainly that the main reason of their discontinuation was due to COVID-19. And that's about 12% of the patients that were discontinued were caused by COVID-19 or 64 participants. Here we have our tables and graph. As you can see, the wheel over here indicates of how many participants and the percentage of those participants of the discontinuation trials were due to what effect. So for ours, what we're mainly looking at was COVID-19. So we found 3 clinical trials, or a third of those that were discontinued, which that included 64 participants. The main amount of clinical trials was efficacy, which had 238. And if we go over here to our figures, we see that out of those 9 that were discontinued, 3 were not in the United States, and 6 were located in the United States. Most of them were all industry, and there is a pretty even spread of how many participants were located in each. For our discussion recommendations, compared to other similar studies that were done about the impact of COVID-19 and discontinuation throughout the pandemic, most of those studies found around a discontinuation rate of 25%, which is actually quite high compared to our 12% that we found. Thus, we're suggesting that pediatric orthopedic clinical trials were resistant to discontinuation. Our study can't give a definite answer of why that is. We can't establish a cause. But some things we're thinking about is pediatric trials in general have to undergo more scrutinized guidelines. So we think those extra hoops that pediatric clinical trials have to jump through made it more resilient to facing the challenges of the pandemic. Another limitation of our study is that the clinical trial lists, or those involved with the clinical trial, self-reported their reasoning for discontinuation. Many were brief. There were some that just said discontinued due to main PI, primary investigator, leaving. Was that due to COVID restrictions, budget cuts? Many of them were just one-word responses, and sometimes made it very unclear as why the actual trial was discontinued. That lack of detail, it makes it hard for us to, for 100% be sure why a clinical trial was discontinued. So we recommend in the future that clinical researchers provide a more adequate amount of detail, thus allowing a proper assessment of clinical trial discontinuation to prevent research redundancy. That is the whole point of, or a major point of the clinicaltrials.gov, is to see why other research clinical trials ended, That way, in the future, those mistakes won't be repeated, and it will help progress the field of research in general throughout all fields. Of course, we would like to go redo our trial throughout the pandemic to see if these are the resilience increases, decreases, or if we'll have an increase in the discontinuation. Here are my references, and then here is my email if you have any questions, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.